There are 3 ways to understand someone's thoughts, but it's crucial to grasp these 3 methods. If you can comprehend them, you will easily be able to discern the thoughts of anyone. A long time ago, in a small village, there lived 2 brothers. The older brother was blind, so he always stayed at home, while the younger brother worked in agriculture. However, wild animals constantly destroyed the crops, causing the younger brother much distress. One day, he had an idea. He thought of using his older brother's help to scare away the animals from the fields. Since his brother was blind, he could stay in the fields and, upon hearing the animals, shout loudly to frighten them and thus protect the crops. After considering this, he built a small hut in the field and placed his blind brother there, asking him to shout loudly if he heard any animals approaching. Upon hearing the shouts, the animals would flee, and the crops would be saved. The older brother happily agreed and began staying in the field from that day onward. Whenever he heard the sound of an animal, he would shout loudly, causing the animal to flee. After several days of doing this, one day, a deer ran into his field, broke through the fence, and fled. But a king who was chasing the deer also arrived at the field. At that moment, the king saw the blind brother and said, "Look, I've come here chasing an animal. Have you seen it around here?" The man replied, "Oh, king, I'm blind. How could I have seen any animal? But I can assure you that the animal that escaped from my field is not worth your time. Don't bother pursuing it." Surprised by the blind man's response, the king was astonished, wondering how the blind man knew that the deer he was searching for wasn't worthy of him. So the king asked the blind man, "Are you lying to me about being blind? How do you know that the animal that fled isn't worthy of me?" To this, the blind man replied, "Oh, king, what you consider a deer is not actually a deer, but a doe, and she is also pregnant. As far as I know, I've never heard of a king who hunts a pregnant doe, and that's why I'm telling you this doe is not worthy of you. Don't waste your time on her." Hearing this, the king was even more surprised, wondering how the blind man could know that the doe was pregnant. After thinking for a while, the king said to his commander, "Commander, I want that animal alive because I need to know whether the doe is pregnant or not, as this blind man speaks with such confidence, and I need confirmation. If it turns out to be a doe and also pregnant, then she is not worthy of our hunt because we were chasing a stag. So go and find out what it is." The commander, with the king's permission, left and, after some time, returned to inform the king that everything the blind man had said was true, that it was indeed a female and she was pregnant. Upon hearing this, the king was astounded, wondering how a blind man who could never see could know such a thing. Pondering this, the king approached the blind man and said, "I don't know if you're truly blind or not, but I've come to ask you something. Will you give me an honest answer to my question?" To this, the blind man replied, "Oh, king, you may ask me whatever you wish, and I will answer truthfully." The king then said, "On the one hand, you claim to be blind, and on the other, you've revealed that the animal I'm chasing is a female deer and pregnant. How did you know? There must be other animals that come to your field and others that pass through here. So how did you make that assumption?" The blind man told the king, "Oh, king, when the animal you were chasing entered my field, by the speed of its run and the sound of its steps, I knew it was a doe. The fence of my field, which is meant to keep animals out, is quite low, but the animal broke through that barrier and fled. If it had tried to jump, it would have endangered its offspring. That's how I knew she was pregnant." The king, intrigued, asked how he knew it was specifically a doe, considering that other animals also passed through. To this, the blind man said, "Oh, king, I sit here all day, from morning to night, and my sense of hearing is very sharp. I can sense what kind of animal has entered my field, and based on that, I shout loudly for it to flee and thus protect my crops." The king was impressed by the blind brother's wisdom, thinking that although the man was blind, he possessed great wisdom and that he should find a way to make use of his abilities. With this thought, the king returned to his palace. After a few days, the king ordered his commander, "Go and bring that blind man to the palace." The commander, following the king's order, immediately went to the blind man and told him to come to the royal palace. The blind man was very clever and anticipated that the king would likely assign him some dangerous task that could land him in trouble. However, he accepted the commander's word and accompanied him to the royal palace. As soon as he arrived at the royal palace, the king said to the blind man, "You are very wise. You can understand anything very easily. I want you to stay in my kingdom and assist me. Today I've called you here because I want to know if my wife is faithful or not." The blind man replied, "Oh, king, what kind of question is that?" To which the king said, "I've asked a perfectly valid question. Please answer me." The blind man says, "Oh, King, put those matters aside. It's been many years since your marriage. Why do you want to know this now? Why do such questions arise in your mind? Insisting, the king says, you must give me an answer to this question. If you don't, I will condemn you to death. Hearing this from the king, the blind man responds, oh, king, if you truly want to know the answer to this question, you will have to do something for me. The king asks, tell me, what must I do? To which he says, for this, you will have to leave your wife alone with me in a room. Hearing this, the king initially becomes angry, but after thinking for a moment, he agrees to the blind man's request and orders his commander to leave the man and his wife alone in a room for a while. Now, the king's wife and the man were alone in a room when the blind man says to the queen, I want to touch you. This enrages the queen greatly, and she begins to beat the blind man with her hands, feet, and throws him to the ground. In this way, she severely beats the blind man. Later, the blind man somehow manages to escape with his life and reaches the king, saying, oh, king, your wife is not faithful. Upon hearing this, the king becomes extremely furious and draws his sword, heading toward his wife. Enraged, he says to his queen, Queen, today you must answer my question honestly, and if you utter a single false word, I will separate your head from your body this very moment. Then, the king asks, tell me, are you faithful or not? This time, the queen replies, oh, king, even if you kill me today, I will tell the truth, I am not faithful. Hearing this, the king feels very sad and disillusioned. Everything the blind man had said was completely true. Immediately after, the king approaches the blind man and asks how he knew that his wife was not faithful. The man says, oh, king, it's very simple. I just told your wife that I wanted to touch her, and she got so angry that she began to hit me with fists and kicks, touching my entire body in the process. Tell me, how could a woman who behaves like that be considered faithful? His logic was unusual, based on a very personal interpretation of loyalty and human reactions. The king responds, you seem very wise. What you say is true. Now answer another question. If you answer correctly, I will let you live. The king asks the blind man if he was truly his father's son or someone else's. The blind man responds, oh, king, what does that matter to you? No matter whose son he is the king of this kingdom. So, leave that question aside. But the king insisted, I need an answer to this question, otherwise, it will continue to trouble me. I want to know the truth, the blind man said. For that, I don't need to see your mother. I can tell you right now whose son you are. But first, I want you to promise that you won't get angry with me. The king promises not to get angry, and the blind man says, King, you are your father's son, but you have the shadow of a greedy merchant upon you. Upon hearing this, the king becomes furious, draws his sword, and rushes to his mother, demanding to know if he really is his father's son. He threatens to take his own life if he doesn't receive an honest answer. It's true, says the king's mother, you are your father's son, but the shadow of a greedy merchant has fallen upon you. Once, after bathing and looking in the mirror, I saw a merchant reflected behind the glass, and it is his shadow that is on you. In this way, the king finally found peace, and he was satisfied. Then the king invited the blind man to stay in the palace forever. The blind man, however, refused the king's invitation, saying, King, now let me go back to my field, that's where I'm most comfortable. The king finally let him go, thinking that some questions are best left unanswered and some answers are better not known at all.